This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you by the Renewed Spirits event, an evening with Elizabeth Smart at the Marriott Conference Center in Florence, Alabama on September 28, 2021. You may remember that Elizabeth Smart was set to graduate middle school in 2002 when she was abducted from her home in Salt Lake City, Utah, and held captive by a husband and wife. She was chained to a tree in a campsite just miles from her home and endured atrocities. However, this was a rare horror story with a happy ending, as the clues led to her safe return less than a year after her disappearance. Elizabeth will be sharing her story of hope, healing, and never giving up. Through this traumatic experience, Elizabeth has become an advocate for change related to child abduction, recovery programs, and national legislation. Elizabeth triumphantly testified before her captor and the world about the very private nightmares she suffered during her abduction, which led to conviction. General admission is $50 per person. Sponsorships are also available. Call 256-335-4062 for more information or check out the links in the show notes. Proceeds from this event will benefit Renewed Spirits, a nonprofit that offers quality mental health services to underserved clients. Renewed Spirits will defer to local, state, and national guidance if COVID-19 cases dictate in September. We plan to be at half capacity and masks will be required to attend the event.
Welcome in to the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. Of course, Will is with us. We are coming to you again from Maywood Christian Camp. We have had a great week. Most importantly, we have surrounded ourselves with some really smart people on the podcast this week, and they have joined us for a couple of episodes. You guys are going to get to hear different ones as we go along. Always a great week to spend with you guys. I hope that your week has been as good as mine.
Man, I'm tearing it up. As in, I'm tearing it up, not doing real good, but God's being really awesome. Will, how's your week?
Man, it's going great. I've learned that I'm getting older. Playing a game of Ultimate Frisbee, a kid ran into me, and it hurt. I was like, I turned around to Travis and I said, the 30s just hit different, man.
So we are excited again to have Don Williams with us, not the Don Williams who sings. My dad's absolute favorite country music singer of all time was Don Williams, but he also loves you a lot, has been around you at the Children's Home, which is one of the things that you've been doing now for how many years?
13 years.
13 years. You preached for several congregations. Before that, you do a lot of seminars and different things around the country, maybe at least around the region. I know I hear a lot about your grief seminars. We've talked to you some about dementia and some of the things that you've helped in seminars with that. But one of the things for a long time, I have been referring people to you for, or to your books that you and your brother have written, is for grief. And so we wanted to have you on here today to talk to us a little bit about grief counseling and helping people through grief, because there is one absolute in life, or there may be a few, but there's one for sure, that we are going to die, or we are going to suffer the death of family members. You know, we're going to go through those things. Sure. And so, Will's brother does work at a funeral home. That business is always going to be there. Sure. And just like this. So we wanted to have you on to just share with us some of that. So tell us what got you kind of started in that work of helping people with it.
Well, I started working in the early 80s with hospice as a chaplain on the side, and began to realize that, as a minister, there's going to be all kinds of losses. I mean, not just death, loss of job, loss through marriage, divorce, loss through health and whatever. And my brother was preaching down in L.A., Lower Alabama.
That's right.
And he said, hey, we started a grief class and it's really working well. So he sent me the notes. Bill McDonald Funeral Home, yeah. Great friend. Helped me get started with this and gave me some information and whatever. And so put all that together, and I believe it was 1982 that I started teaching a grief support class, and I've done one ever since. And the 600 or so people have been a part of that. I learned more from them than all the books and whatever put together. Went to the University of Alabama to get a degree in thanatology, which is the study of death. It's a 60-hour course, and that helped a lot. Those 12 classes, but just talking to people, because, like you said, it's all around you. Forget COVID. I mean, it was before even COVID. COVID's made it even harder because you couldn't hug, you couldn't touch, you couldn't talk except through Zoom or other ways, and so that made it even harder. This year, we're going to be offering another 10-week support class there in the Florence area on Monday nights, hopefully meeting at the Senior Center there in Keelan, Alabama. And I'm wondering if we'll have more than normal, because folks sort of had to put their grief on hold, for lack of a better word. You can't do that, but you can, because there's not a way to deal with it. And so we're hearing a lot of people talking about, my loved one died and I wasn't even able to be there. I wasn't even able to hold their hand. COVID prevented, and so there's a lot of issues because closure isn't where it needs to be, like the normal funeral. There's the visitation and the family personal time, and then the funeral, and even going to the graveside, and we're just getting back to all of that. I remember doing a graveside for all that, wearing a mask. Never done that before in my life, but everybody had one. It was outside, and those are just strange things.
We're kind of looking for, how do we help people who are going through grief as people, either if it's our own family or if it's our forever family, our spiritual family in Christ, whatever the case may be. What are some helpful things that you have learned through the years in dealing with grief?
It's important that we first of all understand what grief is. And the simplest formula that I've seen is love plus loss equals grief. If I love someone or something and I lose someone or something, it's natural to grieve. Job, through the mind of God, had that formula in Job chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. He said, "Oh, that my grief were thoroughly weighed and laid in the balances together, and all my calamities, they would be heavier than the sands of the sea." He was saying, you put all my losses, all those children, loss of health, loss of wife, loss of income, all those things on one side, put all the sands of the sea on the other side, they would be heavier than the sands of the sea. I think he knew something about that equation. And so a lot of times I think that we don't understand it. And we sometimes try to, without meaning to, I think sometimes people try to minimize people's losses. Well, at least you had her for, your mother, 65 years. Or, well, at least you've got, 5 other children. That doesn't take away from the one. One of the classes that we typically talk about is, what are the things that people say and do that hurt you? And I've got a long, long list.
Sure, it's a long list.
Over those many years.
We talked with Michael Whitworth a while back about that.
Love
and
Michael.
He gave quite a list of us of just don't say these things.
Yeah, definitely. And the appropriate things to say. And I think one thing that we need to keep in mind is that if we're back to hopefully normal and we learn of significant loss, nothing takes the place of your presence. Recently there was a funeral that we're all aware of, and 1,000 people stopped wherever they're doing and drove from all over to be a part of that, 7 hours of visitation, because, and others would have been, though, had we not been here. We'd have been there. But nothing takes the place of your presence. You will never forget the people who stopped their lives and came to hold your hand or came to do whatever it was that they did to show their love and concern for you. And so that's really, really important. And then another part of the class is, what do you say? And people try to say too much. Number one statement, I know how you feel. No, you don't. I can name a preacher, and you would know who the preacher was. And his wife, who married him, she was actually his second wife. And she said people would say that to me. And she said, I wanted to punch her in the nose. I said, well, I'm sure glad you did. I make the headlines, preacher's wife, dicks, so-and-so. But she said, that just irritated me. My first husband died of cancer. This one died of a heart attack suddenly. Completely different situations. And yet sometimes people try to minimize, without meaning to, minimize their loss by saying, well, I know just how you feel. And then they tell their story. Please, 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 don't tell your story. That's not the place. They need their grief. And they can hear your story at another time, but they don't need to hear it standing beside their loved one at the casket. They don't need to do that. And later on, were there some commonalities?
Offer that. I would love to share experiences with you.
Later on down the road, write a note or a text or a phone call and just say, I don't know how you're feeling, but this is how I felt. There's a difference there. One of the best ladies I remember who came to our grief class said, when I go, I'll go to the casket, to the loved one standing there beside the casket, and I'll say, I don't know how you feel, but can I give you a hug? And I said, that's amazing because, first of all, you've taken away, I'm trying to one-up you by telling you my story, or I know exactly how you feel. You've already told them that. But secondly, you care. And that goes a long way. If you know that someone cares, they're the people that you're going to remember when you need to call somebody because they truly do care. And in the story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, it's really interesting that Martha goes to Jesus alone. You study the text and you see that Mary, when she got up to go to the Lord, all the people went with her. Why the difference? Why was it that Martha went alone to talk to Jesus about the resurrection of life, but then Mary went with all these people around her? Did they think she needed it more than Martha? Was Martha stronger? Because there's always the strong person in almost any funeral situation. Someone who makes the decision, someone who tells the family this is what we're going to do, or they look to him or her, sometimes it's a her, to take care of those. And I remember one time a lady in our class wrote me the week after we had talked about grief in the Bible, and we'd studied that story. And she said, I was the strong one. I went and planned my sister's funeral all by myself. I went and picked up her ashes all by myself. I planned the entire funeral all by myself. When I crashed, I went to the bottom, and there was no one there to pick me up. Please let everyone know that it's lonely at the top. And I thought, wow, it's amazing. And so we need to keep that in mind. What kind of loss was it? There's a big difference in sudden versus anticipated. Which is the worst loss? Yours, whatever it is. I mean, don't try to one-up anybody. It doesn't matter. I mean, from an emotional point of view, I don't think anybody would argue that the greatest loss would be the loss of a child, because it's a part of you. Loss of a mate is a loss of your arm, someone has said. It's an extension of yourself. The loss of a child is like the loss of a lung. It's within you because it was born within you. We understand that. But the greatest loss, I tell people in class, and typically a lot of people who come have had several kinds of losses. I remember a lady who had lost her job, her husband through divorce, and the death of a child all in 9 months. That's called cumulative grief. They're just built on top of one another, and there was no way that she could begin to work with one before another one came, just like big waves. And that takes longer, but those are the folks that we work with. Somebody stops missing church service or starts missing church services some, and you think, well, wonder what's wrong with her. Well, look at what look what's wrong with her. Not judging, but look what's going on. Look at the kind of loss. Look at the family situation. Or there's some ways we can intervene. There's some ways that we can offer counseling.
Diamond Rio song, she misses him on Sunday the most.
Yeah.
It talks about, all the things they did, but how she misses his voice in that pew. And man, just how hard it would be to go back to a place that you had so many good things happen. So that was what came to my mind when you said that. Like, you know, and you've got to work through those things, and something that's come out on the podcast is static.
Yeah.
You know, we want to make it steps. I want to make it steps. I want to hurry this thing along and let's get over it and move on. And that's not healthy.
Yeah.
It's not, you know.
And when they do come back to church, don't let them sit alone.
Yeah.
Sit with them. I mean, that's going to be tough. And they may come with family, or they may not be able to come with family. But I remember a lady, and when her husband, who happened to be an elder of the church, died, the first Sunday she sat alone. And the Sunday night, the preacher met with some of the people and said, "We've got care groups. We say we care for one another. Sister so-and-so sat alone." The next Sunday, 3 rows of people sat with her. And from then on, they kept on. That's important. Just little things like that. Not trying to deal with it is like trying to cover up cancer with a Band-Aid. You can't be the stiff upper lip. You know, you can't go under it. You got to go through it. You can't get around it. And to me, people do. I mean, you know, they you know, we're not going to cry. These people came to see us cry. We're not going to cry. You know, we're just going to keep a stiff upper lip.
So, you know, when we come to dealing with grief, there's a lot of things. Well, obviously, we've already talked about some things, but what are some suggestions you might have, even for the families that are dealing with it? What are some things that they might do or not do when it comes to, you know, that initial grief and going, you know, into the services or whatever else? You know, that's a tough time because you're trying to figure out what do we do here? How do we handle this? So what might be some things that you suggest there?
Work on your time frame, not anyone else's. Somebody may suggest that you need to hurry up and do whatever. You know, mom dies, you need to go through all her clothes and get rid of them real quickly. Work on your time frame, not theirs. Family needs to be on the same page. Don't let people rush through your grief. Doug Manning has written a lot of books about these things. And he tells a story about someone who lost a child very suddenly, and a chaplain was saying that, you know, he just thinks she needed to get on with it. And she said, I am going to have my grief. You're not going to take it away. That was the name of the book, the idea of that. You know, not trying to deal with grief is like trying to cover up cancer with a Band-Aid. You just can't do it. And so it takes time. It takes patience. It takes love. It takes, you know, folks who care for you to be with you in that long journey. There's not a time frame. You're going to grieve as long as you live. Now, maybe in lessening points as you work through it, go to grief support classes, go to counselors that can lead you in the right way, churches that support you. All those things help a great, great deal. But just realize that different kinds of losses, sudden versus anticipated, people are going to look at those griefs differently. Your age versus their age, that's going to have a lot to do with it, you know.
So this is a question, maybe a little bit off on a tangent, but I've always wondered, I wonder how much, you know, when I was growing up, you did long visitations. You know, then you do a visitation that day and the funeral. We still do that some. We've started going back to like the one day, or going to like one day things. But you can probably remember, not pointing out your age, Don, but you can probably remember that there was a time when the funeral process was several days long. Yeah. And there was those sitting up. You know, we're big fans of Ray Stevens, you know, so Sitting Up with the Dead is a song that comes to mind. But, you know, that concept of you spent days grieving, you know, in that time period. Mm-hmm. And does it feel like maybe some of that process has been, do you think it's been helpful to shorten that process? Or do you think it's been a little bit, you know, it's taken a little bit out of it and made it harder for families? I'm just curious.
It's my opinion that I think it's not been helpful. We live in a modern, I want it now facility, you know, world. You know, push the button and instant breakfast in 2 minutes, or microwave or whatever. And I think a lot of times people think of grief in the same way. And you know, our African American friends have a custom, I guess is the right word, of 6 to 7 days. And during that period, they are surrounded by love and care and concern, and they have their grief, but it's also a celebration at the end. And I think there's something, I've talked to some of them who've been a part of our classes, and they've been so helpful to let us understand that, short is not always better. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really, really important. And I think people need to realize that, because, this is a significant loss in your life. This is a person that, indelibly put footprints on your heart and life. And just in a matter of a few hours to take that away, that's not healthy.
Well, you mentioned Lazarus. 3 days he'd already been in the grave, and there was still a bunch of people around there with them, like you said. Yeah. So,
and like us today, he was
stinking.
Their clothes. This is shirt number 8 this week. This is a new one. Yeah. It was a new one an hour ago.
It was.
It may not be now.
We put the pressure on.
I saw him moving.
Yeah, we put the pressure on.
Slide down a little bit.
Short is not always better, except for preaching. I've got a thought. When my father-in-law passed away, there's a lot of people that would come to my wife and go, "Well, time's just going to fix it. In time, it'll get better." In those moments, smart thing to say, bad thing to say. I know it's with good intentions. Just curious as someone coming from grief, because I'm kind of under the assumption, like you, that it's always there. Yeah. And nothing's going to feel, my wife's hole in her heart that only her father could feel.
The less you say, the better. It's what you do that makes the difference. It's cleaning the car for the funeral, for the family that will be using the funeral. It's taking the food to them. It's remembering them on their birthday and anniversary. We had a lady who got flowers on Valentine's Day from a couple because that husband had always done that in the first year.
Wow.
They did that. It's remembering those things that help heal. It's what you do with your time. What are you doing with your time?
Well, I had somebody this week just talk about, I want to stop hurting. Somebody that's going through that. And, and I have people a lot, when will the hurt stop? And, I just don't know what to do with all those things. And you may say yay or nay, on this, but a lot of times my experience has been that I still hurt sometimes from some of my losses, but it's not the gaping wound that it was. Yeah. There's still a hole there.
Right.
There's still very much an emptiness on some level there. Right. But, as time has gone on, it's more of, I remember that scar and I can remember how that felt, but it's not the gaping, festering wound that it feels like in that immediate moment. And time does, it takes a long time for it to not be that. Does that seem pretty accurate for what you've seen?
I tell people grief is, first of all, like a mirror. You look at yourself and you see yourself for what you are and the loss that you have. You lose your hair or whatever the case, when you're getting older, more wrinkles, whatever the case, you see that. Grief needs to be a mirror as long as it needs to be a mirror. What you hope to do is to work through your grief in such a way so that the glass turns outward and becomes a window where you begin to see the hurts of others. And by helping them, not only do you help them, but you also see your reflection in the glass is helping yourself as well. Our Lord was all about that. He says the greatest thing is to see the needs of others, Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. But only you can turn it from this to this. Don't let anybody rush you to that. But hopefully, you can do that in time with what you do with it.
I've heard people say, well, so-and-so would want you to be tough. That's what they would want.
Not cry.
Don't cry. And I would just encourage that we don't know what so-and-so would want. Mainly because they're not here anymore. But, I'm sure that would change their perspective. So don't use the memory of a loved one to pressure someone to feel a certain way.
Sure.
I've even gone so far as to set an alarm in my phone 2 weeks after the funeral or 3 weeks after the funeral. Call this person, text this person.
These are great
because, that finality isn't for everybody. It's easy for me. Hey, we've had the funeral. It's over. Let's move on.
Right,
but they're going to deal with that. And so you mentioned some books.
rondonbooks.com. And we've written 2 books. Walking with Those Who Weep it was written in 1996 and has done well. And then I wrote in 1998, I think it was, Hope for Those Who Struggle, which is sort of a sequel, but it deals with individual kinds of losses. Walking, we call it Grief 101. It deals with 13 chapters. A lot of churches have used it in studying Bible class. And then right before COVID hit, we wrote How to Help Yourself and Others in Times of Grief, this little 12-page booklet. And if they will mention Ben and Travis to us, you can email me at donwill55@yahoo.com. But if you'll do that, we'll even give you a discount on buying that stuff.
How about that?
Oh, yeah.
Now
It pays to listen to this podcast.
It's Ron, RONDON,
All together, one word.
rondonbooks.com.
Yeah.
As a foster parent, adopted parent,
Yeah.
man, I just can't say how much we appreciate you and the work. We know it's not just you. My mom has worked with y'all at times, and
Love to have her back.
I love to have her back.
Have you back.
You send that
Please.
message, she'll listen. And I think that has helped her in how to deal with our kids, and made her, not that she wouldn't have loved them anyways, but to see the situation in which they had come out of similar situations. And
the North Alabama Christian Children's Home is a bright spot in our community.
How can they help you? How can our listeners help that ministry?
Pray for us. We'll send you a list of our children's birthdays. Write them a note. Let them know that you're thinking about them. That means a great deal. Because some of their birthdays have not been real good. And invite me to come, and let me come and tell you about what we're doing and who we are and whatever. We're just trying to make a difference. And we've taken in between 500 and 600 children in the last 48 years. We're getting close to 50 years.
Wow.
Y'all really done a great job of just, that place looks so nice. And so, guys, summing it all up, I mean, Don, you work with the children's home. If a church really wants to get involved with that mission, with helping these kids, they can contact you for that. They can contact you for grief seminar. You and your brother do those, or also, as we've talked about on another episode, dementia, Alzheimer's, those sorts of things. You do seminars for those. So you're really a wealth of information, and there's something almost for everybody there. Because every church is dealing with really those two issues, and every church really should be helping out in reaching out to these kids who are in need.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com, and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.